Hi, welcome to Detours Understanding Acquired Brain Injury. Welcome to Essentials of Acquired Brain Injury, Infectious Diseases of the Nervous System, Part 1. And we'll be talking about what are the causes of these infectious diseases of the nervous system in this first part. And we'll be looking at the different pathogenic or disease-causing organisms that lead to acquired brain injury. First of all, there are different ways to classify living things, and there's been debate as to which taxonomic system we should use. I'm going to use the taxonomic system that includes 6 different groups of organisms. One of the problems is with this system, it does kind of leave out viruses, viroids, and misfolded proteins, prions, because, again, there's a lot of debate about how to look at them. They're kind of living, but not exactly, and there's still no resolution as to where we should place these things, because viruses and viroids are, they don't live inside of a cell for part of their life cycle. They're just naked DNA or RNA, and that's all they are. And they require another cell. They have to hijack a cell to cause it to make copies of themselves. They're not capable of independent reproduction. They don't produce their own energy. They're precursors to life, so they don't fit in a classification system. So we'll talk about them a little later and how they affect as disease-causing organisms. So with a 6-kingdom system, and when it comes to a taxonomy organization, what we're talking about is how you think of life. So you have at the very top and most encompassing part of this classification system, you have kingdom, phylum, class, order. Yeah, there's a saying that I learned when I was in 5th grade from my brother. You'll please pardon it. It's a bit rude, but it does help. King Philip came over 4 group 6. So it's kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. For mammals, it goes like this. Here's a picture of a dog, and then just going down the lists of how it's organized all the way down to species. You could do this for anything else. But when it comes to bacteria and other things, other living things, it's the same old system that's been around for centuries. It's just now we have to fit them into a slightly wider, so kingdom, which encompasses animalia or animals, plants, fungi, protista, and then bacteria is divided into 2, archaebacteria and eubacteria. So most pathogenic bacteria fall into what's called archaebacteria. And now what this is, these bacteria do not have mitochondria. We're familiar with, we've all seen those videos as kids, it's the powerhouse of the cell. The ancient bacteria evolved first. They did not build that symbiotic relationship with mitochondria to make their energy. Mitochondria make energy and dispose of waste. I've mentioned mitochondria before. Then there's the eubacteria. Eu means good, and what's different about them is their DNA is in a nucleus, and they have mitochondria, unlike the archaebacteria, where pretty much all their stuff, they really don't have many organelles. Their DNA is just anywhere in the cell. They have no mitochondria. They don't have Golgi apparatus. They don't have all the stuff. So they're a newer form of life. They came after the archaebacteria and most other living things too. Then there's Protista, which is kind of a garbage can category for anything they couldn't figure out where to fit. Cells that have, like plants, that have chlorophyll, but they move, and they're single-celled. They have mitochondria. They live inside of things, and they just don't know where the heck to put these things. Amoebas. Who knows where the heck to put these things? Sponges, other things. So they end up being thrown in this category. Like I said, it's kind of a trash can category where you're not exactly sure where to put these things. That's where they end up, under Protista. So what things can be pathogenic and cause brain injury? Back to our point. These things, which are most typical, as I said, single-celled organisms, with exception of one class of animals, one class, and that is the worms, humulants. They can cause pathogenic infections. So you can get cysts from, for example, trichinosis. Eating uncooked pork, you can get cysts in your brain and it can do damage. So with the exception of the roundworms and the flatworms, which are animalia, obviously, animals, that can cause brain damage. But typically, the things that can cause acquired brain injury that are organisms that invade the body are obviously from the archaebacteria, from the bacteria, and are from the Protista. So this junk can category for who knows what, and because they have some features of plants, some features of animals, some features of, and then the archaebacteria, mostly. There are a few eubacteria that fit in there, but yeah, Lord knows. So those, and fungi. Can't forget fungi. We don't see plants. Algae, there are some unusual algae which can cause brain injury, but this is for immunocompromised individuals. So these are unusual circumstances. And I want to stress that, it's like the damage that they cause isn't directly through the organism invading the brain directly, but it's through toxins they produce. And if you remember our video on toxic and chemical encephalopathy, byproducts can do damage. But in those cases, it will be classified more as toxic or chemical encephalopathy. Domoic acid and amnestic shellfish poisoning. It isn't that you get the algae itself in your brain, it's that you get the toxins and byproducts. And here's where things kind of overlap. And it has to do with suppressed immunity as well in many cases. But so there's a lot of gray areas here where it's, are you affected by the organism itself invading your brain tissue or some areas in your body, and it's toxins that do the damage? Or is it growth of the organism itself, such as in primary amoebic meningoencephalitis? And in that case, obviously it's an amoeba, which is a member of the Protista. All right. So those are the different guys that can cause brain injury through direct invasion and through the production of their waste. And part of how this causes infection is the fact that we can't necessarily keep up with killing off these critters if they set up shop anywhere in your body and invade the tissue. All right, so these are the different living things that can cause you to have acquired brain injury. Now, where they invade also affects the symptoms and affects long term. Got to get out the brain model. There are different types of acquired brain infections. First of all, as I've mentioned before, you have a 3-layered covering which protects the brain itself. These coverings are called the meninges, the dura mater, the arachnoid, the pia mater. The arachnoid and the pia mater form the leptomeninges. These are what usually get invaded in cases of meningitis. Meninges, meningitis, inflammation of the meninges. These 2 lower layers. And certain organisms that invade cause them to obviously become inflamed as a reaction of the body to their attack, to their infection. And they cause the distinct symptoms. There is bacterial invasion, which happens through a variety of mechanisms, including things like skull fractures and even hairline fractures after a traumatic brain injury, which is why we're at greater risk. Septicemia, we talked about that too. We talked about sepsis, where it gets into the body and, due to a variety of factors, breaks down the blood-brain barrier, which then will lead to it getting into the meninges, the coverings around the brain. Viral, which I'll get to in a moment after this, because they behave differently. Viruses, fungi can infect the meninges, and as I've mentioned before, the protista. A lot of them are involved in meningitis. Primary amoebic meningoencephalitis. All right, encephalitis. Encephalitis is a direct attack on brain tissue itself. In this case, the parenchyma, I've mentioned this, which is the tissue, which is the fatty coverings as well as the neurons themselves. And remember, neurons only constitute 10% of the brain. 90% is things like oligodendrocytes, Schwann cells, other supportive astrocytes, which also help in the conduction of nerve signals and the production and cleanup. So with encephalitis, and again, you can have bacterial, viral, you can have fungal, direct infection of brain tissue, bacterial, archaea bacteria. And so, again, you're dealing with a slightly different set of symptoms, but encephalitis. So encephala meaning, or encephalitis, referring to head. Encephala refers to the head. And in this case, you're talking direct brain tissue infection, not the coverings, but the brain itself. And then finally, meningoencephalitis. We're talking about both the coverings and the brain tissue. Obviously, even more devastating. And you have the same bad guys involved. You've got the archaea bacteria, you've got protista, you've got fungi that can get involved. And in some of these cases, it's just people who are immunocompromised. But you got the viruses. Those can target just about anyone. So it's important to keep in mind that it's like the clusters of symptoms will be somewhat similar for initial presentation, but long-term effects, treatments will differ. Again, worms are also a risk. Those tend to be more under specific circumstances. And there are things you can do, and there are medications against all of these things. However, viruses are more of a specific case because they are so common. So I want to transition into viruses briefly. Viruses and viroids and prions. So a virus, as I've said in the beginning quickly, is a non-living thing. It is a protein coat around either DNA or RNA. DNA is double helix instructions, and in the case of a virus, it is instructions on how to copy itself. A lot. And some viruses, we use the Baltimore classification system. That's this. Some viruses are complete. Some viruses are incomplete. And it doesn't matter because the way even an incomplete virus works is it causes because of mirroring in the viral mechanics. There are virologists who study this. I took an interesting course, an online course from Columbia, which is fascinating as heck. The virus is still able to replicate itself to make a complete copy, so it can make incomplete copies of the virus. It's much more efficient. It's kind of like a compressed zip file, if you think of it that way. If you've used file compression, that's kind of how an incomplete DNA virus works. And there are RNA viruses, which are literally RNA, which is used, or ribonucleic acids, which are not even complete DNA, but they have the instructions to make proteins. DNA has to be transcribed into RNA so it can make proteins. RNAs are even simpler and may be the basis for all life. So these extremely simple sets of instructions, which may be also incomplete, single-stranded copies, and they replicate as well, copies of themselves. And that is the whole purpose behind a virus. Make so many copies of itself till the cell bursts and spreads more copies. And depending on where it sets up home, if it sets up home in your meninges, you'll get viral meningitis. If it sets up home in your brain tissue, you'll get viral encephalitis. One of the most common forms of viral diseases that affects the brain, viral herpes encephalitis. And this is not the STD. This is the one that 90% of people have. 90% of everybody alive has this herpes virus that can cause this. There's nothing you can really do about it. And it doesn't present in most people. It only pops up if your immune system is way down because you're exhausted, sick, and not taking care of yourself and things. So this is the most common form of encephalitis, and it's just a simple self-replicating herpes virus. So it's about, is your immune system good enough to keep it in check? And that's the truth for all viral conditions. And there are viroids, which are even simpler than that, just a couple of sequences, but their purpose is still the same. Replication for survival. Again, it seems as though really the purpose behind any virus or whatever else, or viroid or segment, is just self-replication. And reproduce till it destroys the cell. They burst out and spreads to the next cell. We will talk about treatments for viruses. Antibiotics do not work on viruses. Antivirals target viruses, but they have to be specific. We will get to that again later. Then finally, there are prions. Now, prion is strange. It is definitely not alive. Whatever arguments you want to make for viruses and viroids, they're precursors to life. We've seen evidence of the DNA and RNA molecules in space. So we know that whatever is necessary for life, the ingredients are out there. We've seen them in nebulae, out in deep space. So we know that the ingredients, but prions are a bizarre kind of thing. What they are is misfolded proteins. They are not made of what DNA or RNA of. They do not contain instructions for life. They are proteins that are not folded properly in neurons. They are misfolded, and they're folded in such a way as to induce other proteins to follow them, to misfold. So if they're folded in a strange way, the charge, literally the electrical charge on them, causes other proteins to replicate and fold and misfold and misfold and misfold till the neuron fails. Their goal is not to reproduce themselves or anything like that. Their goal is not causing, they just happen to be folded in a deficient way, and it causes a replication until the neuron chokes and dies. If that sounds a little familiar, it should, about choking off and dying, because many of the tauopathies seem to be prion conditions. CTE, Alzheimer's, Pick's disease, this warped symmetry, 6-sided versus 8-sided symmetry. They seem to be prion conditions. So many of the dementias, the progressive dementias of the elderly, seem to be because an error in DNA causes a misfolding of the tau proteins. So these seem to be prions as well. However, these other prion diseases have been looking at, like Creutzfeldt-Jakob, and which is mad cow disease, but in humans, are simply misfolded proteins that can be transmitted and are resistant to heat and cooking and things like that. And can be transmitted from person to person. Spongiform encephalopathy. It's simply a bad protein that's misfolded. Is this folded protein where DNA and RNA come from and life comes from? Maybe. There have been a lot of biophysicists who've made this argument. But this is also another form of pathogenesis, but this definitely falls outside of the definition of life. There aren't many prion diseases, but these are some of the more interesting ones because they work based on all living things work on the principle of physics, but this is a direct lesson. And it's uncommon to get these, like really uncommon, but it does happen. And so it's important to be aware of the symptoms, the signs, and treatments. And we will be getting to those in the next video, where we will be talking about specific diseases and less about the foundational work that this video was about. And we'll be looking at, when it comes to infectious diseases of the nervous system, we will be talking about specific viral, fungal, protease-based, and some of the viral causes of acquired brain injury and what the symptoms are. And then finally, in the third, we will be talking about then what the treatments are. Unfortunately, they're fairly limited. And so this one gives you the foundation. Those two get into specifics. Please like and subscribe, comment, share. I also urge you to check out our website, Friends with Brain Injury, which is our specific website. And also keep in mind we have a Facebook as well, Friends with Brain Injury. It's a public site, and we hope you can find information there. And take care. Bye.